actions, though not surprising, are not in line with what his own vice president claimed would happen in the days just prior to Trump's inauguration. Roughly 2 weeks ago, in mid-January, then Vice President-elect J.D. Vance was on Fox News, and he seemed to suggest that people who committed violence would not get pardoned.
I think it's very simple. Look, if you protested peacefully on January the 6th and you've had Merrick Garland's Department of Justice treat you like a gang member, you should be pardoned. If you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned. And there's a little bit of a gray area there.
Really, that's not what Trump did. He issued that blanket pardon. Now, the mass pardons were not universally welcomed by Republicans. A few dared to speak out. Here's Republican Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. He was on NBC's Meet the Press this weekend.
I fear that it will get more violence. Pardoning the people who went into the Capitol and beat up a police officer violently, I think was a mistake because it seems to suggest that's an okay thing to do.
Jackson Reffitt told ABC News that he's concerned too. His father was sentenced to 7 years in prison for the January 6th attack. And that happened after Jackson turned his own father into authorities. Now, his dad is free.
I love him, and I wanted him to get help in prison, but electing these guys more radicalized, and he does not need more contact with these far-right extreme militias that are going to validate him. He needs help, and this pardon is not going to help him. This is just going to validate him and justify every action that he has taken leading up to this point. And that's what scares me, is who knows what that validation could lead to.
Another man, Stuart Rhodes, was at the top of Trump's commutation list. He's the founder and leader of the far-right extremist group, the Oath Keepers. He had been serving 18 years for seditious conspiracy against the United States in relation to the attack on January 6th. After he was released this month from a Maryland prison, Rhodes waited outside the D.C. jail for other defendants and then talked to the media.
I think it's a good day for America that this has been wrongs are being undone. So that is pretty sure being in the first place. Now you got more of a trial for a fair trial.
What do you think about police officers who were injured in this?
What do you want to say?
I mean, there are some Capitol police officers who were seriously injured in this,
Okay,
and they're concerned that people are not going to have to face any charges for.
No, they do face charges.
But now they're being forgiven.
Like I said, you'll presume innocent until proven guilty until you get a fair trial with a fair jury that's going to hold the government to a standard beyond reasonable doubt. And the judge is also fair to hold the government to its evidentiary burden of turning over exculpatory evidence and also not do perjured testimony until you get that fair trial. You presume innocent until proven guilty.
After his release, Rhodes also paid a visit to the U.S. Capitol, the very building he had attacked 4 years earlier, apparently to advocate for the release of another Oath Keeper. A judge has since barred Rhodes from entering the Capitol or Washington, D.C. without court permission. Now, we wanted to go over that history because it has been 4 years since that unique and terrible day in U.S. history, January 6, 2021. And with these blanket pardons for people who try to interrupt the peaceful transfer of power, something that's been going on for centuries in this country, and they tried to do it in many cases violently, that calls into the question this country's faith in the entire concept of the rule of law. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But let's start with some more details about this pardon, or these pardons, and we'll go to Paula Reed. She's chief legal correspondent at CNN. Paula, it's great to have you back.
And thanks so much for having me.
And thanks to you for listening through that history that we felt very strongly we wanted to go back over. I mean, with that background in mind, spend a minute giving us more details. I've been saying pardons and commutations, but it was overwhelmingly one of those things. What actually happened?
Yeah, that's right. Look, one swoop of a pen, he just ended all of the approximately 1,600 cases stemming from January 6th in 3 different ways. Most of the people, the overwhelming majority of people who had been convicted received pardons. 14 people were selected for commutation. So that means their sentence is wiped out. They can walk out of jail, but they still have that conviction. But there's going to be a process to review those commutations, and some of those 14 people could very well also receive a pardon. And the last group are people whose cases are still pending. Those cases are going to be dismissed. But what we were promised was kind of this nuanced approach, violent versus nonviolent. But it was clear in the past few months of reporting and talking to Trump advisors that this was likely going to be something much more broad, because they were so determined to do this on day one, and they were resistant to any kind of process, individual case-by-case assessment that would take time.
Was it just his advisors that were resistant to the process, or President Trump himself as well?
So Trump had vowed to do this on day one. So his advisors tasked with figuring out, okay, how do we do this? The one thing they said is, we're not going to do a case-by-case basis. This isn't going to be the usual process. And I said, okay, well, how are you going to make this distinction that Trump is signaling he wants to make? Vance, even the Speaker of the House, have all said you're going to differentiate between violent and nonviolent offenders, because this is a very violent event. And if you don't do a case-by-case basis, it's hard to distinguish, because even if you said everyone charged with assault will be pardoned, well, that's a very broad variety of conduct that is charged under assault. Also, you have people like Enrique Tarrio, who you referenced, who did not directly engage in the violence, but was directing it from afar, and also received one of the most serious sentences. So it was clear that this was going to take a lot of work. There's a lot of nuance if you really want to parse out violent versus nonviolent. But Trump wanted to send a message, and he just said, you know what, let's just do it this way. So something much more broad than what he had signaled.
Okay, Paula, hang on for just a second. As you know, we have to take this quick break. When we come back, I want to take a big step back about the entire concept of the rule of law in this country, and what the January 6th pardons tell us about our national faith in that founding concept. So we'll have a lot more in just a moment. This is On Point.